To choose the genes. In the cells society will take us and choose.
In a future where humans are engineered for perfection,
Heart disorder, 99% probability.
Vincent Freeman was born.
Come on, you coward!
Without the genetic code to succeed.
You know you're gonna lose.
And his only chance is to hide his own identity.
I'm going up.
By borrowing someone else's.
This is the last day that you're gonna be you and I'm gonna be me.
How do you expect to pull this off?
I don't know exactly.
Columbia Pictures and Jersey Films present Ethan Hawke, Uma Thurman, Alan Arkin, Lauren Dean, Jude Law, Ernest Borgnine, and Gore Vidal in Gаттaka. Created from the inventive mind of writer-director Andrew Niccol, Gаттaka takes place in a future not far from our own.
It's not a piece about, the gimmicks of the future. It's simply about if things keep going scientifically as they go, what might this world be like?
It is science fiction, but at its core, it's a film about an individual. The juxtaposition of those two things I found exciting.
Ethan Hawke portrays Vincent, born into this world without genetic engineering.
In this world, baldness and blindness or short-sightedness and lack of height, increased IQ are determined. And depending on how much money you have, you can determine how tall, how bright, how musical, how athletic.
First, we may as well decide on gender.
We would want Vincent to have a brother, to play with.
His future is pretty much mapped out for him about what his life is going to be like.
You have to be realistic. With a heart condition like yours.
Mom, there's a chance there's nothing even wrong with me.
The only way that you'll see the inside of a spaceship is if you were cleaning it.
It's not so far-fetched. You're restrained by what world you're born into.
Welcome to Gаттaka, gentlemen.
Unless he takes some drastic measures.
When you clean the glass, Vincent, don't clean it too well.
What do you mean?
You might get ideas.
You have somebody in mind? You could go anywhere with this guy's helix tucked under your arm.
Newcomer Jude Law plays the real Jerome Morrow, the key to Vincent's entree into Gаттaka.
You really want to be in there? I don't want to be in there. I want to be up there.
Vincent requires the bodily fluids to pretend under analysis that he is me. So I give him my blood, which he wears in sachets on his fingertips. I give him little packets of my fingernails, my hair, skin follicles, eyebrows, eyelashes.
Look at it. It's silver. Jerome Morrow was never meant to be one step down on the podium. With all I had going for me, I was still second best.
Eugene doesn't have the spirit, but he has the blood. Vincent has the spirit and needs the blood.
Congratulations.
What about the interview?
That was it.
I got it.
Of course you got it.
Roll sound and video, please.
Speed.
Congratulations, Jerome.
Thank you.
Uma Thurman plays Irene, obsessed with her own genetic imperfections.
She is someone who is completely daunted by every piece of limitation that is sent her way.
Seems you're everything they say you are and more.
What about you, Irene? You're engineered just like the rest of us.
Not quite like the rest of you. An acceptable likelihood of heart failure. I think that's what the manual says.
Well, if there's anything wrong with you, I can't see it from where I'm standing. They have got you looking so hard for any flaw that after a while, that's all that you see. For whatever it's worth, I'm here to tell you that it is possible.
What he embodies is someone who refuses to accept their limitations and thwarts them constantly, and has the courage and the audacity to do so.
The man was murdered.
So I didn't do it.
I didn't say you did, but if the man was murdered, the place is going to be crawling with Hoover.
I'll take my chances with the J. Edgars over the mission director.
Just
Mr. Director, you will be pleased to know that we have a suspect.
That is a relief. Who is it?
Beautiful.
For the cast and crew, the human spirit at the heart of Gаттaka comes from its creator, Andrew Niccol.
Andrew Niccol is a very, very, very talented, gifted, unique man. This is a really unique voice, and there are only a handful of people who do that.
When you read Andrew's work, it's not like anybody else's or anything else's that you've ever read before. I mean, Andrew has a very unique worldview.
Parker?
I can't believe you pulled this off. They're sending you up there.
This is all coming from some very odd part of Andrew's mind. I really love it because it's so very original.
It's graceful like a classic. It's really a story about the triumph of the human spirit and the triumph of the will.
I have a feeling he might be there under false pretenses, playing somebody else's hand.
God, even you are gonna tell me what I can and can't do now?
I say we sample every employee within the parameters. I suggest blood from the vein.
They are going to find me.
Marker?
There was that kind of energy around the project. We felt like we were a part of something really special.
There's a real timeless quality to not only the look of it, but also the message.
It was a great experience.
When anyone asks me what movie I was most proud of working on, I say Gаттaka.
Andrew was so clear in his mind about what he wanted it to look like.
Jersey Films produced the movie. Danny DeVito, Michael Schamberg, Stacey Scher, Danny DeVito especially, was involved and a real champion of the movie.
I remember falling in love with it immediately when I read it.
You begin it thinking, potentially this could be a piece of cake, this could be easy, but every movie has its challenges.
Because of the budgetary limitations of the movie, we didn't have the money to come up with an entirely new world, a futuristic world to create. Instead of creating an entire new future, they would just take the best elements of the past and kind of drag it with us into the near future.
Andrew, you know, I tell you, I liked Andrew the first time I met him. I was very lucky and excited to work with somebody as talented as Andrew.
He believed in Gаттaka, and he knew it was his shot, and he wanted to make it great.
He had a pit bull type quality where he'd latch onto a scene.
Andrew created a world, and he pretty much was able to do whatever he wanted with it.
He's great with images and in metaphor and allegory. I mean, and there's very few directors working in cinema today that even use allegory or metaphor.
Part of the way that Andrew works is he will create these large poster boards that represent the character of the location.
Isolated little groupings of photographs and things cut from magazines, newspapers, whatever, that said the look of maybe the housing development where the degenerates would live, the look of Gаттaka inside.
And it's a great way for him to, you know, sit down with a production designer, a cinematographer, the costume designer, essentially say, here, look, this is, you know, how I'm envisioning this project to look like when it's finished.
We did about 2 weeks of rehearsal. That's another great thing about a writer-director is that he can adeptly alter the script to suit its performers. You cast Ernest Borgnine, you make it work for Ernest Borgnine.
What about you, Your Majesty? You dreaming of space?
Ethan Hawke was the first actor that was actually cast in the movie. He had just done a film called Reality Bites with Jersey Films.
Congratulations.
Well, what about the interview?
That was it.
They wanted to get him with Uma Thurman.
Didn't the director threaten to cancel your mission more than once, Jerome?
Yes, he did.
Somebody did you a favor.
And they'd always wanted to work together, and here was a perfect opportunity. It just was like a perfect combination. The chemistry was there. So first it was Ethan Hawke, and then Uma Thurman came aboard, and ultimately Jude Law was cast.
I think I was being kind of checked out by everyone, because no one knew who I was. I was this young whippersnapper from England.
His first film, Jude Law, yeah. And it was, the cast was great.
Jude Law at the time had not done an American film. He was in a Broadway play with Kathleen Turner at the time called Indiscretions that our casting director, Francine Maisler, had seen while she was in New York. And she thought that he would just be perfect to play this character.
You still don't understand, do you? When they look at you, they don't see you anymore, they only see me.
There was something magic about working with Jude. Our scenes, we have a lot of scenes in our apartment. You know, I'm going to the refrigerator and we're yelling at each other.
My God, what's wrong with the machine?
There's nothing wrong with the machine. It's a hot sample. You've been drinking again.
I haven't.
Oh, Christ, Eugene. It's 8 o'clock in the morning.
I haven't.
Yeah, Ethan and I just never let the ball down, really. We had a very similar way of working, and we'd go and rehearse on the set, so that it really felt like our apartment.
Lauren Dean's coming to the apartment. He's got to drag himself up the staircase, and I'm hiding down beneath it. And then the scene with Uma outside the apartment. Those scenes felt very special to me, because I knew that we were discovering a huge talent in Jude.
It was a kind of, living the dream moment, really. I'd only done theatre prior to that. I was still green enough to kind of tip up and watch when everyone else was working. I went to watch Alan Arkin at the raid scene because I've been a huge fan of Alan Arkin's for years.
Don't touch your face, don't swallow, don't spit. Let's clean his teeth.
Someone who stands out in particular was Detective Hugo, played by acting legend Alan Arkin. And he was a pleasure to work with. He really believed in the story and the message of the movie.
I say we test again.
Test. I cannot allow you to disrupt operations any further.
You're not at all concerned about having a murderer in your midst?
Right now, your presence is creating more of a threat.
Gore Vidal. I love you, Gore Vidal. Really a treat.
Gore Vidal is not, an experienced actor, and that was really fun and interesting to watch him try to do these scenes.
I don't have to tell you how important this expedition is.
Andrew had this great idea for an opening sequence, and there was no money to shoot it at the beginning of the movie. So he and I figured out, how we could put this thing together.
The skin flakes and the hair strands are actually plastic models that were created specifically for this sequence by the visual effects department.
We settled on a more traditional high-speed camera approach, building sort of bigatures, gigantic miniatures of all the objects, and then shooting those on a stage that was supposed to look like a really close-up view of the makeup table that he used to prepare himself for work every day. Basically turned on the Photosonics high-speed camera and shot them dropping out of the sky at 360 frames per second. Burned up a lot of film. The hairs were also bigatures. Basically, they were sort of big wires. They were about that big around and maybe 4 or 5 feet long, and we dropped a bunch of those.
We did quite a bit of storyboarding for the movie. We used a guy named Trevor Goring, who's a really gifted illustrator, and he worked throughout pre-production with Andrew Niccol and Jan Rolfs to lay out a number of the more technically challenging scenes in the movie, such as Jerome climbing up the stairs, the spiral staircase in the apartment building, Jerome running across the street where the cars are, he can't see, and he's running across the highway, and the cars are, zooming back and forth.
Come on, we'll miss it!
Come on, we'll miss it.
Sławomir Idziak, a very renowned Polish cinematographer, shot the movie. Andrew was familiar with the work that he had done on a lot of Krzysztof Kieślowski's films. Really a gifted artist.
The work of the cinematographer Sławik and the production designer Jan were part of each and every frame of Gаттaka.
One of the reasons the film holds up so well over time is Jan Rolf's production design. He was able to do so much with so little on this movie.
I was just so thrilled with the look that Jan and Andrew came up with, because I think that the kind of classic retro, clean lines, a lot of aluminum, a lot of nickel, black. I think, if I do say so myself, I think it's a fabulous looking picture.
It was a movie where architecture really was a character in the film. And each of those buildings was chosen specifically because of what it said and what it indicated, either in terms of the storyline or in terms of the individual character.
I wasn't used to that. You know, Andrew drove me bananas worrying about the frame. He is a real aestheticist. You know, I mean, he cares about how things look.
We used the headquarters of the DWP downtown, which had this helical staircase and sort of the imagery of having the helix in the background for Blair Underwood's character being the doctor, the geneticist. There were lots of visual winks and nods to the storyline that Andrew incorporated through the Jan and Bob's sort of collaboration.
When I first heard about the project, I was working on a film with Danny DeVito, and he said, you know, Em, you're gonna love this movie. It's all about props, and there are all these great props. There's urine and semen and blood. I was like, oh, goody. Every prop was a challenge. Everything had to be perfect. Everything was going to be under a great deal of scrutiny. All around us all the time, there are pieces of life. There are mites and skin and hair and bits of little orts all over the place all the time. So we wanted to be able to see those whirling around in the vortex of the vacuum cleaner. So we made glass vacuum cleaners.
I was pitching my idea for the complicated whirligig to Andrew, and he said, no, just make it look like this. It was supposed to be the inside of the finger pricking mechanism that all the Gаттaka employees stick their finger on in the beginning of the movie. Andrew and I designed a version of this thing that would show the audience what was actually happening inside this machine, and there's probably no way that this thing would have actually fit inside of the turnstile that was, that was displayed in the movie, but it did tell the story, and it was basically kind of a side view of a bunch of syringes that spun around, and every time it would rotate into frame, it would fill up with blood, and then it would rotate out of frame, and the next one would come, and then you cut to the people outside, and they're sticking their finger on it. With a sound effect or two, it worked great.
To this day, it's the only movie I ever worked on where I was scouting for an angle or a curve or the side of a building. For example, the Great Western Forum was used for the DNA testing center. All we used there was really the outside colonnade, which curves, and we used the ticket window there at the Forum.
Irene takes the sample hair she's gotten out of Vincent's desk to make sure that he really is what he appears to be. And she goes to a walk-up gene testing facility, and she gets back a computer printout, and the tubes, the plastic tubes, were underwear containers. There was a certain kind of really disgusting men's underwear that was for sale at the time, and they came in those tubes.
Action! Choice of the cars, which are retro cars in a sense, but the choice of them made them look very futuristic.
For Irene Cassini's character, who's played by Uma Thurman, we used a Citroen convertible, which is, I believe, one of only 1,100 or so that exist in the world. And what we did was just added a sound effect of an electric motor as opposed to a gasoline-powered motor.
One of the buildings that Jan and Andrew wanted to use from the very beginning was the Marin Civic Center, which was the last public building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright.
Even though they were built many years ago, they're so futuristic at the time, they really worked well. So we shot probably scenes in every area of the building and of the lot, day and night.
That building presented us with a lot of problems. One of them was that it leaked like a sieve, and it was raining while we were there. And the people who worked in the building were ready for it, because once it started raining, buckets came out from all the offices and caught the water as it fell through.
Jan Rolf's production team did a number of sketches early on of the interiors, which we would build on a soundstage and match to the exterior locations where we actually shot in LA, and also at the Marin County Civic Center. For the Gаттaka computer room, while the exteriors were all shot at the Marin County Civic Center, we actually shot the interior at a warehouse in West Los Angeles.
The main computer hall was used not only as a computer hall, it was used for the entrance to Gаттaka where they came up the escalators. It was used for the liftoff port where people entered to go into the tube to fly away. It was used as the training room for the Gаттaka astronauts. It was used in many ways, and we had to schedule that in a finite number of days to be able to give our department time to change that over.
We found our man. It's the only specimen in the entire place that can't be accounted for.
I remember a day specifically where we geared up specifically to have a very long dialogue scene between Alan Arkin and Lauren Dean, where they walked and they talked through this huge computer hall. And we couldn't find a way to build a block-long room. So we did it through, like, not necessarily hidden cuts, but cuts. So they walked through the computer hall, and all the computers were facing one way and all the desks one way. The electrical department had rigged everything under the floor to allow for a quick change around. So the whole crew pitched in, and we changed the attitude of all the desks. Maybe we reversed them. While the art department did their sleight of hand, they moved in a few extra set pieces, whatever, and everything plugged in. Probably in about 30 to 40 minutes, we were able to now bring the cast through with maybe a slight camera change and an angle, and it looked like they were now coming through another part of the same room. We did this 3 times within one day.
Well, that's a damn shame, sir.
The scenes of the lovemaking had to be so dramatic that even though the bedroom was there at the beach, it wasn't quite there enough. So what we did is we went to a place where at low tide the ocean will go out and it's very rocky. And we built a stage, and her bedroom there at White's Point in the parking lot, only the portion of the parking lot that gets flooded when the tide comes in. So it's quite dramatic when the water is crashing underneath them.
The largest problem we had with that was to stop the surfers throwing stones at the windows. We spent a lot of money on guards for that set because there were these giant, they were almost the perfect window to throw a stone through. So we had to, we spent a lot of money guarding the windows on that set.
I remember one of the best images of the movie really is a guy going off to space in a suit.
At the time, Columbia Pictures had an issue with this. They couldn't understand, well, how can you go into space wearing a business suit? That just doesn't work. They were expecting something with a helmet and more like your classic astronaut. So what Andrew did is because, one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, Stanley Kubrick's 2001, has a number of people, in space in business suits. Andrew sent them a copy of that scene. We laid it off on a VHS tape and sent it over to the executive offices, and we never heard from them again.
It's also one of the first and only times I've ever read a script and then seen the final product, and it's been almost a mirror image. Like, it hasn't gone through any massive change in the editing process.
It had its own pace. We let those long shots linger. We allowed the slow push-ins to happen.
Vincent?
We allowed the reveals of certain characters cinematically to happen. And it makes for a truly organic, wholly beautiful piece.
When Gаттaka was first released, part of the marketing campaign was we actually took out full-page ads in national newspapers for a fictitious genetic research lab where you could call in and actually have your child genetically enhanced. And even though it was bogus, we actually got thousands of people called up hoping to have their next child genetically enhanced. The original ending of the movie included a sequence that we called the Genetic Hall of Fame.
One of my favorite things that was taken out of the original showing of the movie, there was a great moment in the end where he talked about all the people who wouldn't have been born.
series of images of people who, had we had genetic engineering before they were born, probably wouldn't have ever been born at all. People who have had a profound effect on human history, and if they didn't have whatever genetic issue that they, ended up having, they would probably have never been born. We decided at the very last minute to cut it out of the movie just because we felt like the movie itself makes the point, and we didn't want to hit the audience too hard on the head by having this add-on to it. I think over the years we have all regretted making that decision because it is a beautiful piece and it's just a really nice button on the end.
It really was ahead of its time. The ideas were ahead of its time. I mean, it's all very relevant right now. It's about the individual and what is individual rights and what is individual freedom and what is our desire to eliminate everything that's unique within us. And it's our uniqueness that makes us special.
Andrew's always been attracted to stories about the triumph of the human will, the underdog who's unwilling to accept the hand that he's been dealt. And in this case, it's genetics.
I can't believe you pulled this off. They're sending you up there.
I mean, these have been addressed in Brave New World, they've been addressed in other places, but it was a neat thing to do it via cinema.
Many, many years later, I was in a play up in Providence, Rhode Island, and there was a guy and his wife sitting next to me, and he's the head of the research department, and he reached over and he shook my hand. He said, "Thank you for making that movie. I show it to all my classes."
I've had the occasion twice to talk to kids in high school who have had Gаттaka become part of their curriculum.
Gаттaka is one of those movies that really has sort of stood up, and it's endured the test of time. It was so well designed and so well thought out, and the quality of work on that movie was just so uniformly good.
You can have actors standing on the most expensive set in the world, but if it doesn't connect to you emotionally, then it doesn't work.
It's still, in my opinion, kind of landmark in its style, in its content.
The clean lines, the sparseness, the elegance, I think that all holds up magnificently.
It's a movie that will long outlive us all.
As we come to learn more about how the DNA in our genes both ties us to and differentiates us from each other and all living things, we are approaching a point in technological history where a world like Gаттaka, a place where our genes determine our worth, is not only possible but possibly imminent. How did we get here? How did we come to know what we know about genes?
The first breakthrough that led to genetic engineering came in the 1950s by an American and a British scientist, Watson and Crick. They worked out how the genetic code works. And it's a chemical called DNA.
Watson and Crick established the actual physical structure of this DNA. And what they showed that was so critical is, firstly, the DNA is a very large chemical molecule. It's made up of small beads strung together And there are 4 different sorts of beads, and the order in which they're strung together is the basic code.
These beads are actually the molecules: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, or GTC and A. As Watson and Crick were studying the arrangement of these molecules, they noticed that G was always coupled with C, and that A was always with T. In addition, they noticed that by connecting these molecules by their hydrogen elements, the same shape was created, and by stacking and twisting these pairs, they discovered the double helix structure.
Because the way in which they sit next to each other is absolutely rigidly determined by their chemistry, if you pull them apart, each one makes an identical replica of itself.
The great mystery of genetics was suddenly dissipated, and it was straightforward chemistry.
The second breakthrough came in the 1970s with a British scientist called Fred Sanger. He worked out not how the code works, but how you can read it in a practical way.
In order to find a specific gene within the DNA code, scientists had to find the order of the GTC and A molecules in the DNA strand. Fred Sanger used 4 different chemicals that would attach to the GTC or A molecules in a fraction of a DNA virus. By doing this, one of the chemicals could locate all the G's in the DNA strand. Another would locate the T's, another the C's, and then finally the A's. This process, developed by Sanger, is known as gene sequencing.
Over a 20-year period, we went from having the Watson and Crick paper to having recombinant DNA methodologies. That was of monumental importance and generated companies and generated enormous amounts of new knowledge and gave us an ease with the handling of genetics that we had never had before.
At this point, scientists understood what genes were and how they worked, and were beginning to understand how they could be manipulated. However, in order to find a specific human gene, they needed to determine the sequence of the GTC and A molecules that are specific to the human species. This sequence is the human genome, and the initiative to discover the sequence is called the Human Genome Project.
As a logistic exercise, it was absolutely huge. They were putting 73 million letters of DNA onto the web free every night, just in order to stop it being, in a sense, grabbed by the commercial sector.
Mapping the human genome is a fantastic achievement. I don't think it's necessarily in itself going to lead automatically to miracle cures or to crops that grow anywhere. The code has been read for a human being, but then you've got to apply it.
It gave us a catalog, and it gave us, it's not just a catalog in the sense that it's a set of different objects all put together. It's also this long string of information that is seen as having various forms of codes in it that tell us different things, that tell us not only the structure of proteins, but the structure of inheritance, the structure of development, the structure of gene control. Many different things are buried away in the structure of DNA.
Having a map of the human genome would open up endless opportunities. But what scientists were most excited about was how this could aid in the search for cures of genetic diseases. However, as benevolent as this intention is, some of the new technologies in gene therapy have become quite controversial.
The cells that people get excited about, very excited about, are the cells that are present normally only in very early embryos, and they can give rise to lots and lots of different tissues. If you could get those cells, you would be able to grow a piece of pancreas that would help a diabetic, or a bit of brain that would help someone whose brain was deteriorating because of Alzheimer's.
It sounds amazing, but actually it's not that much different to what we already do routinely in terms of bone marrow transplants, where we can collect bone marrow and give it to someone with the same tissue type, or even collect your own bone marrow, treat you for a disease, and then put your bone marrow back in again. In the future, I think we'll see it being used for repairing livers and skin and broken backs, for example, where you could repair a broken spine because our body can't do it for itself. But in order to get into stem cells, we have to start working with another scary word, cloning.
Dolly was born in July 5th, 1996, but it was not because people were interested in human cloning. They were interested in pharmaceuticals, the idea of modifying the genetics of a sheep udder, and so that pharmaceuticals could be produced inexpensively by sheep and extracted from milk. So we're talking about pharmaceutical production. They didn't even think that it would create the furor that it did.
The sheep was the perfect slogan animal for this radical new technology. People were taken aback that you could actually make an identical animal out of the DNA from its, what do you call it? Parent? No. Grandparent? No. Progenitor? We love the idea of this plump little sheep that's a copy of something else. I think in a way it's the only sort of safe and happy feeling we have about cloning.
The word cloning originally simply meant making copies of things. It was a routine process in the laboratory. But then people realized with Dolly the sheep that you could actually clone whole human beings. In theory. In practice, we're not going to because it would be profoundly dangerous to try. Dolly produced hundreds of profoundly disabled offspring before they got one right. So we're not going to go in for what's called reproductive cloning. But what we are going to go in for is therapeutic cloning. So if I had cirrhosis in the future, instead of waiting for someone to get run over so we could ask for the liver, what we might do is take a nucleus from one of my cells, put it into an embryonic cell, persuade that cell to turn into a liver cell, grow a large quantity of it, and then effectively make me a new liver.
Now, a lot of people believe that when something has the therapeutic potential and the potential for understanding that cloning and stem cells provide us with, which is enormous, that we have to look very carefully at our moral precepts. Well, isn't there a difference between a blob of cells and a person?
One day, in principle, when we understand all this, we'll be able to use synthetic chemicals and do it all in a test tube. Until then, the only access to these cells that can turn into pretty well everything are either very, very early embryos, which haven't turned into anything yet, so still have the potential to make all tissues, or else this trick of reprogramming, which was discovered with Dolly the sheep, which needs egg cells in order to set it off.
We don't know how to do these things today, but we'll never find out how to do them unless we work on them. So we're in a sort of catch-22. You have to be able to do the research, but the people who are trying to block the research are saying, well, since it's not around the corner, we can block the research. And it's not around the corner because the research is blocked. There we are.
In Gаттaka, for the first time, we're asked to examine an age-old myth in a new light. What will happen if we can suddenly control the basic essence of life?
Controlling our own evolution in the future has become technically possible. It's not something that we're easily going to do, but you can see a short distance down the road these questions being asked.
Genetic engineering began 200 years ago and has been accelerating ever since.
People are fascinated by the notion that we could somehow engineer ourselves. And that's because it fits into this metaphor of here we have reached out and we have controlled the natural world around us. We have in fact fashioned the human environment out of our own will. The new technologies that are emerging from our understandings of our own biology are very troubling to lots of people. And there are a variety of reasons that are put forth as to why that is so. Foremost among them is that we are somehow playing God.
Many people look at genetic engineering and say that God made us in a certain way and we should accept what we get. But in fact, people don't realize that we've been rejecting what we've been given at birth for over 100 years with the use of traditional, what is now traditional, medical technology.
The big question in genetic technology is who gets to decide? Will the government say you can't choose your child on the basis of intelligence? You can't choose to make a child that won't be a criminal. You don't have to have a big imagination to see where that's going. People want to know now, can the state say you can't have a baby? Can the state say you can't engineer a baby? Who decides? That's the big question.
Of course, it's illegal to discriminate. Genoism, it's called. If you refuse to disclose, they can always take a sample from a door handle or a handshake, even the saliva on your application form.
Genoism is a term that was dreamt up to explain a phenomenon of the future. The idea is that when people start to make choices about what kind of family they want to have, what kind of kid is good enough, that fashions emerge so that people begin to think of a certain kind of child as being good enough, and it spreads. Genoism emerges when you don't have the right kid, when your child is a product of luck, as in Gattaca, and that luck suddenly becomes something we demonize.
Neurological condition, 60% probability. Manic depression, 42% probability. Attention deficit disorder, 89% probability.
I teach about Gattaca in my class, and I ask them whether they think that genetic discrimination already occurs. And I tell them that there actually is a chromosome right now where if you have this chromosome, you pay $500 more in auto insurance in New Jersey. And of course, the chromosome is the Y chromosome.
The use of genetic profiling is something that we simply have to face because the opportunity is there. I think what you have to do is to say, we need a form of universal health care that doesn't ask the question, what is your genetic determination? And so we've got to look on the political side at the implications of what the science is telling us. So this is a very real issue right now.
I think the next century is going to challenge our vision of ourselves as no previous century has. The real issue is whether we can continue to face the possibilities of the future or whether we're going to pull back in fear and turn over that exploration to other braver peoples because, in fact, the next frontier is not space, it's our own selves.